Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We appreciate you being here and value your time. So we are starting on time and we'll end on time because we appreciate that you are taking the time to join us for this important webinar. My name is Elizabeth Foster Nolan. I am the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and along with the presidents of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut and the League of Women Voters of Rhode Island, who are co-sponsoring this, we thank you. I also want to thank our co-sponsors for joining us today and for co-sponsoring this event. The Acadia Center, the Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and Ceres. We are so glad to join these partners and to work together to help inform our members and others about the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is being advanced by Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. I will now hand it off to my friend Jane Coster, the president from the League of Women Voters of Rhode Island. Jane?
Thank you, Elizabeth. So this event continues the tradition of the League of Women Voters as an organization that advances civic discussions and encourages debate and action. The League of Women Voters cares about climate change and about environmental justice. We need to advance solutions to these challenges that we have because the status quo is not working. All of our communities, we feel, deserve better. And now I would like to hand it off to our Connecticut president, Carol Reimers.
Thank you very much, Jane. I am Carol Reimers, president of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. And the League of Women Voters of Connecticut believes that transportation is a critically important issue right now, and particularly in our state. Connecticut lawmakers are going to be deciding soon how to move forward, and the Transportation and Climate Initiative could be an important part of transportation reform and reinvestment here. This webinar is an opportunity for all of us to learn more about TCI and how we can be involved in shaping it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Dempsey, the Director of the Transportation for Massachusetts Advocacy Coalition.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, Jane, and Carol. My name is Chris Dempsey. I'm the Director of Transportation for Massachusetts, and we are honored to be co-sponsoring this event with the League of Women Voters, an exceptional institution and organization in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and really around the entire country. We're going to get right into the program today, and I'm going to introduce Katie Dykes, who is the Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Commissioner Dykes was nominated by Governor Lamont to serve as commissioner and was confirmed in February of 2019. She previously served as chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority from 2015 to 2018, and as deputy commissioner for energy at Connecticut Deep from 2012 to 2015. Katie also served as chair of the board of directors of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, from 2014 to 2017. RGGI is a multi-state effort focused on reducing carbon emissions from electric generating facilities. So there is no better experience for being involved in TCI, which is a multi-state effort to reduce emissions from transportation. Katie is a graduate of Yale College and the Yale Law School. Commissioner Dykes, we're so grateful that you would join us today and take the time from your busy schedule to share some thoughts on TCI. You've been a leader on this issue across the region for the time that you've been Deep Commissioner and really shown the importance of this program for Connecticut. So thank you for being here. The floor is yours. And when you're ready, I'll share on my screen the slide that your team sent over earlier today.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm so excited to be with everyone today. We are about 3 weeks from the end of the legislative session here in Connecticut, and this could not be a more consequential moment here in our state and for Southern New England, and really for the Northeast as a whole, as we're poised to make history and make an enormous impact in addressing climate change, in reducing air pollution, improving public health, and especially doing so in a way that will help address inequities and racial injustice in communities that have for too long been burdened by disproportionately by air pollution from our transportation corridors. And the way that we can do this is by supporting Senate Bill 884 here in Connecticut. As folks often ask me when I speak on various, topics around climate change, they say, well, what can I do? How can I really, what's the most impactful thing I can do? And because of the leadership of the governors here in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Governor Lamont here in Connecticut, as well as Mayor Bowser in DC, we have that opportunity to make a major impact. Governor Lamont joined with those other governors and Mayor Bowser to sign an MOU last December to say we want to move forward and implement the Transportation Climate Initiative program as a region. Because we know that when we are able to implement programs on a regional basis, it supports economic competitiveness. It ensures we get more bang for our climate buck. It helps us really leverage more climate leadership. And so that's why we're excited to be doing this as a region. But here in Connecticut, we can't join this program unless we get authority from our legislature to do so. Massachusetts has that authority in statute already, but Rhode Island and Connecticut need the authority. And so we have 3 weeks left here in our state to get this bill over the finish line. So the Governor Lamont has made this a major priority. I've spent a lot of time with him on the road and virtually talking about the benefits of this program. And I'm excited to share them with you very briefly today. So if you want to share that slide really quickly, what is the Transportation Climate Initiative, and why are we so committed to it? Why are we so excited about it? Why is it such a priority? Well, what it does is it takes the successful model that we've done for power plants and regulating emissions from power plants since 2009 here in the region, and it applies it for the first time to the transportation sector. The transportation sector is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our economy here in Connecticut, and I know that's similar for our neighboring states. So we have an ambitious target of achieving a 45% reduction economy-wide in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. There is no way we can meet that target unless we get this program, unless we get the tools we need to address emissions from the transportation sector, which produces 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in Connecticut. And it's also responsible for the lion's share, 67% of air pollution, air emissions that are generated here in our state. And that's all coming from vehicles, from trucks and passenger vehicles, buses and vans that are combusting fossil fuels. And so we, through this program, we will put for a first time a cap on the amount of emissions that we will allow from the transportation sector, from the combustion of those fuels. And it's a simple program. Some have tried to, opponents of this program have tried to paint it as a gas tax. Quite simply, what it is a program that requires polluters to pay for their pollution. And the polluters we're talking about here are those companies that sell gasoline and diesel for on-road use at wholesale for resale in our participating states. And so the program will set a cap on emissions. It will ensure that those emissions come down by 26% over the coming decade. And it will generate billions of dollars in revenue. Again, the payment from those polluters, it will generate billions of dollars that our states will be able to reinvest in clean transportation solutions. And those solutions are really, there's a whole variety of things we can do with these dollars to improve public health and reduce emissions. We can invest in electric vehicle rebates, electric vehicle charging. We can convert our bus fleets, our transit buses, 6,000 school buses that we have here in Connecticut that our kids with their developing lungs are riding on every day. We can convert them over to clean electric fuels. We can invest in bike lanes, walking, more walkable cities. We can invest in transit-oriented development to reduce the amount of commuting people have to do. We can invest in broadband to help folks avoid having to commute and telework. We can also invest in expanding transit service, especially paratransit and microtransit, and things that can better connect rural communities through transit that are currently underserved. There's so much that we can do with these funds that will reduce emissions. It's in line with where the market is going, as we see exciting announcements coming from the major auto manufacturers that they are going to be phasing out internal combustion engines over time. But it's very urgent for us to have these dollars to be able to invest. We know the Biden administration is advancing an infrastructure bill and program that will be very sweeping, but all of those investments that could come for electric vehicle charging and so on in that bill will require state and local matching funds. And so that's where TCI will be especially important to help us be at the front of the line to attract those federal dollars and federal support. Lastly, really, really important aspect of this program is that it puts equity at the center. There is a commitment in Senate Bill 884 here in Connecticut that 50% of the revenue from this program, $500 million here in Connecticut, will be spent on communities that are overburdened by air pollution or underserved by our transportation system. And there's a commitment to ensuring transparency and participation of those communities, those marginalized communities, in the decision-making around how these dollars are invested. So if you can take the slide down now, but this is, this is a really big deal. And it's going to be a tough vote for some legislators, here in the state. We're fortunate to have so many great legislative leaders who understand the need to act urgently on climate, but unfortunately, opponents are continuing to spread misinformation and characterize this as something that's going to, increase consumer costs or be a gas tax, when we know that our families are paying an asthma tax. They're already paying high costs associated with medical bills, with lost work, and the impacts of having poor air quality. So we are very excited about how this will transform our communities here in Connecticut. We think that getting this bill through in Connecticut is critical to enable the region to move forward with the program. There's more than a dozen states around the country, the Northeast, that have been at the table helping us design this program. 4 jurisdictions are moving forward right now. And I am very optimistic and confident that if we get this successfully launched with Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and DC, more states will then join over time. That's what we've seen with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So with that, I couldn't be more excited about this, but I will say we're getting down to the wire. And that's why I'm eager to, and happy to have this opportunity to talk about what's at stake, and, happy to take any questions you might have. But thank you so much for the time.
Commissioner, thanks so much. It's inspiring to have someone who has both your passion and your expertise in a public role like yours. So thank you for all that you're doing. I want to ask you one question, then we're going to go to a little bit more depth on TCI. If you're able to stick around for the Q&A period, we'd love to have you stay, but you have a lot on your plate, especially over these next few weeks. So if you do need to jump off, that's okay too. My question is about environmental justice, which many of the participants in today's webinar care a lot about. The League has said needs to be central in their discussion of this policy. And we know that environmental justice cannot be addressed by a single policy or at a sole point of time. It has to be a process. Could you say just a little bit more about how you think TCI can help over time, and how communities that are burdened by environmental injustice can have a seat at the table and see some of the benefits from a policy like TCI?
Thank you for that question. I think that this has been a really important and critical part of the discussions and development of the TCI program. To be honest, when we started off, and it's been many years that states have been talking about and dialoguing around TCI, environmental justice was not, really at the forefront of our discussions around how to design the program. But because of advocates really having such a strong voice and talking about the need to center environmental justice in the design of this program, I think that the bill that we have in Connecticut and the commitments that we have from our agencies and the folks who will be involved in implementing this program reflects a great enthusiasm and commitment to using this program as a vehicle to address environmental justice. We, we have both commitments within the structure of the bill to establish an Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Council that will help to facilitate engagement from those affected communities directly in identifying what constitutes an overburdened or underserved community, how the engagement should happen with those communities, ensuring that there's proper oversight on an annual basis of how the dollars are spent, that we have the input from communities directly around what to prioritize among the solutions that I mentioned to ensure that these are these programs work effectively for those communities. And so this is a really important hallmark of the TCI program that, frankly, we don't have currently for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program. So I think that this is a great example of how the cap and invest model that we have used for RGGI is being strengthened through TCI to be a vehicle and an engine for addressing inequity. To have here in Connecticut, we expect to generate about $1 billion in revenue through participation in this program between 2023 and 2032 when it would go into effect. If 50% of those dollars are being spent in communities that are overburdened and underserved, I can tell you $500 million is transformative. So it's both about having a process that ensures engagement, that ensures that these communities have a seat at the table, but it's also about the resources and the revenue that would be specifically dedicated to addressing the needs of these communities, which that will be revolutionary. We just have not had dollars kind of set aside specifically for really addressing these inequities. And I think I'm very excited about how this program can be an engine of change to address these inequities going forward.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. We're going to hear from a leader in Rhode Island a little bit later in our program to make sure we have Rhode Island and Connecticut covered. But first, I want to go to advocates, to Mal Scalron from the Green Energy Consumers Alliance and Ali Gold-Roberts from Ceres, my colleagues in advocacy for TCI. Ceres is a nonprofit that works with the business community, companies, and investors to ensure that the case is being made that the environment and environmental policies are good for business, and that business needs to have a role in advancing those policies. The Green Energy Consumers Alliance, where Mal works, is a nonprofit that enables New Englanders to make green energy choices, things like electric vehicles, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. So I'll hand it off to Ali and Mal to walk through the overview of TCI, kind of a TCI 101, so that everyone on this webinar understands the basics.
Great, thanks so much. I think Mal, you're up first.
Yes, yeah, just pulling up my slides here. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great. So first of all, I want to start off by giving a thank you to Commissioner Dykes for presenting a really great overview of the Transportation and Climate Initiative program and all of the benefits that each state has to gain by participating in the program. I want to start off talking about why transportation is on the agenda and some of the underlying issues in the existing system that I believe TCI will help address. Obviously, we're all aware of the fact that the climate crisis is accelerating, and transportation is the largest source of emissions from our states. In part to a lot of the great work that's been done over the last several years to decarbonize the power sector and start to make some gains there. For a long time, we really haven't had the political will or alternatives to be able to talk about transportation and decarbonizing it in the way that we've needed to. And so focusing on climate now in the transportation sector is really exciting. But in addition to releasing climate warming gases, vehicles are also a source of soot and smog that harms our health. It's getting warm out in New England, and with the warmer weather, we're going to start to notice that, especially near highways and where there's a lot of vehicle traffic, the air starts to feel thick. That is the result of air pollution. And children are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of impacts, and especially low-income communities and communities of color tend to experience the brunt of air quality issues in our states. It's a matter of equity to make sure that we all have healthy air to breathe, and addressing the pollution from our vehicles is a major opportunity to correct this inequity. And finally, another issue that we haven't had to deal with for quite a bit, or a lot of us haven't had to deal with because we've been working from home, but the issue of congestion. When stay-at-home orders were in full swing, we were all marveling at the clear roads and whether it would be the new normal to live a life without congestion. But as people are returning to work, as the weather is getting warmer, we're seeing vehicles returning to the roads again, and we're losing time and wasting energy sitting in traffic. And so there are some serious underlying issues in the transportation sector as we've known it, and TCI can help address all of these problems. Not just the climate or the air pollution issues or the congestion, but all of them simultaneously. And it's a really good first step to be able to address all of these issues. Is, you know, there's no single policy that'll fix it all, but TCI is the best start. I want to dive a little bit more into how exactly the program works to reduce emissions. As Commissioner Dykes mentioned, the first kind of part of the program is to cap pollution. This is really important because we've seen that transportation emissions tend to grow over time as people drive larger vehicles and also drive more miles. So putting a cap on the pollution that comes from our vehicles is absolutely critical to meeting the mandatory climate goals that now all 3 states have enacted on the state level. The second kind of major part of this is transportation fuel suppliers must obtain an allowance for every ton of carbon dioxide resulting from the fuel that they sell and is subsequently burned. The number of allowances available align with the decreasing cap in emissions. And so as time goes on, a lower cap means fewer allowances, which means we are able to effectively reduce pollution from the sector. The buying and selling of these allowances generates revenue, and that's where the real magic of the TCI program is. And that's what makes it special, and where we can start to address some of the inequities that I had talked about before. The revenue generated through the program is invested back into communities to help us be able to access the clean and affordable alternatives that are available now, and the ways that we can start to transition away from a gasoline-powered vehicle, which for a long time has really been the only option for lots of commuters and lots of people just trying to get around in our states. And so this program will really help create those options so that you're not just choosing between a gas-powered car and a gas-powered car, but you have lots of different ways to be able to get around according to when and where you need to go. Across the 4 jurisdictions that have already agreed to participate in the program, the TCI program will generate $300 million annually starting in 2023 to be able to invest in all kinds of different modes that really enable there to be something for everyone as a part of this program. And so a few of the options are available on the screen there. The first of which is better and electrified transit service. Transit can be a really reliable and affordable way to get around, but only if service is consistent and frequent. So being able to invest in our transit services will be crucial, and especially in the electrification of things like buses. Diesel vehicles are some of the biggest polluters in terms of worsening air quality. And so if we're able to electrify buses, that means we're directly improving the air quality around the folks that tend to use the bus, which generally in the 3 states tends to be lower income folks and communities of color. And as Commissioner Dykes mentioned, there's a huge opportunity to electrify school buses as well, which will make sure that children see the cleaner air that we really want to be able to deliver to the region. There's also an opportunity to improve walking and biking infrastructure. lots of trips. Most trips, in fact, are less than 2 miles. And so if we can get people out of cars and onto bikes or sidewalks to be able to make those trips, that does a lot to improve the climate and also does a lot to improve our health as well. It's great for respiratory health and cardiovascular health. And then finally, the cars that remain on the road need to be electric as quickly as possible. More options are coming and they're becoming more affordable every day because of advances in battery technology. You might have seen press coverage of the electric Ford F-150 that President Biden was able to test drive and check out recently. And so more options are coming and there are going to be more vehicles, and the goal really will be to make sure that the folks in our states can access those, including investing in charging infrastructure. So before I hand it back to Ali to talk a little bit more about what the process for TCI has been so far, I want to emphasize that the benefits of this program exceed the money that's generated through the buying and selling of allowances. In addition to the millions of dollars that will be generated every year through the program, there's lots of monetized health benefits that can be gained by preventing unnecessary emergency room visits, by preventing unnecessary lost work days and premature deaths as well. So that's a benefit and a focus that we can all see. And then finally, I want to emphasize Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Washington, D.C. don't refine or produce any petroleum products. All of the dollars that we spent on gasoline and diesel flow out of our economy. And so by focusing on clean modes of transportation that are centered right here in New England, we can actually make sure that we create clean energy jobs and continue to deliver benefits to all people in the region, including workers and people that need to benefit most from the transition to the clean energy economy. So with that, I'll pass it off to Ali.
Thank you so much. And I will now aim to share my screen as soon as Mal, you hand it over. But in the interim, I'll just get started in the interest of time and walk people through stepping back a little bit, kind of which states are involved in TCI, how does the adding a little bit more about how the program works, and of course, engagement opportunities. So with that, I hope you all can see my screen and let me know if that's not working. TCI actually includes 12 states. We've talked about 3 plus the district who are involved in the MOU, but there's actually a greater group of states all up and down the Eastern Seaboard who are continuing to collaborate on the initiative and support the draft rule and helping craft the proposed program. And in particular, what's fantastic is that we know that transportation is the largest source of carbon pollution in the region, but that transportation, energy, and environment agencies have to work together as part of this program. So as the revenues come in, as we cap and invest, these agencies can work together and innovate in ways that we can invest in the many great solutions that Mal outlined. So with that, many folks have seen, oh, I can't see, oh, there we go, sorry. The states issued a draft model rule for the regulated entities in March and received public comments until May of this year, and now are still receiving public comments on the engagement process. But this rule kind of outlines how the states could work together across the region and then leaves a lot of room for state innovation. And that's where my colleagues from Acadia Center will talk a little bit about the legislative opportunities that we see around the horizon. One thing that I think is really important to note, and Chris mentioned Siri's mission, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this, but we know that the business community and higher ed and employers are really behind Transportation Climate Initiative. They are behind the program because obviously they see transportation emissions as a key focus of something we need to reduce, but also that the benefits will work for their employees, for their customers, make the economy of these states attractive for investment, and ultimately achieve the companies and our global and national and regional climate goals. So we've seen a lot of bipartisan collaboration, business community really stepping up. And I think that that's really important as we think about the importance of the program, but also the durability of how we move forward and really building off of past multi-state success. One of the important points that both Commissioner Dykes and Mal talked about are the equity principles. The states collectively have committed to invest 35, and I should say a minimum of 35% of the investments of the program into underserved and overburdened communities. Each state can work together to define what underserved and overburdened communities means. That will be done through the creation of an equity advisory board. And through legislation, states have an opportunity to up that number to 50% or 70%, or who knows how much more. So there's an opportunity for stakeholder engagement and to really ensure that the benefits go to those who have been disproportionately impacted from transportation pollution for many, many years, and ensure that really we work to right those wrongs. There's also important transparency around the investments, where they go, and ensuring that that's reported annually. Looking at air quality monitoring to ensure that there are no hotspots for pollution, but actually instead we're really honing in on ensuring that communities who have been part of big transportation corridors or distribution centers are really targeted for electrification and public transit and bikeable and walkable communities. And of course, the states have talked about support for complementary policies, and we've seen the states already move forward with certain proposals like the advanced clean truck rule, additional public transit investment. Commissioner Dykes mentioned the federal investment that we're hoping to see around infrastructure, which obviously would be an important complementary tool. And the TCI states may have a leg up because they've already started this process and already started to think about tools and equity advisory bodies as a means to really help drive these investments. So in some respects, we could be seeing a doubling or tripling of those investments as we work on all those complementary policies together. And finally, and I think I only have about a minute left, I wanted to outline the kind of engagement opportunities, since this is a group of people who are committed to action, policy action, and we are eager for your support. And I think Commissioner Dykes really laid out that we've got a quick timeline in Connecticut and certainly Rhode Island, and the urgency of the climate crisis is really calling on all of us to work as quickly as possible. So there are ongoing opportunities to provide states input on the public engagement planning process through the Georgetown Climate Center, which is the entity that's holding all of the states together. Additional states can join at any point. So if you have friends, family members, neighbors, or businesses that are in the other states, as more states join and as we finalize the program, we expect more states to join, that will only make the program more robust. And again, the authorizing legislation is under consideration in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and my colleagues will speak to that in just a moment. And then we will see the program really start to hit the ground running in 2022 and into 2023. So with that, I will kick it back to Chris in the interest of time, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Ali and Mal. That was a terrific overview. You covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and we're really grateful for that. So I promised all the participants today, all the folks who have joined us today, that you would also hear from Rhode Island, and I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Senator Alana Demario, who was first elected to the Rhode Island Senate in 2020. Senator Demario is a licensed mental health counselor in private practice, and she earned a bachelor's degree from Wells College and a master's from Bridgewater State University, so also a multi-state person and education there, Senator. We're always glad to see that. The senator is on the board of the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization of Women. And most importantly for this conversation, she is the lead sponsor on the main TCI bill in the Rhode Island legislature. Senator Demario, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you'll be able to share some of the highlights of the bill and also tell us how it's being received by your colleagues in the Rhode Island State House.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you so much, everybody, for the opportunity to be here today. I appreciate that introduction. Yes, I am actually a Massachusetts native. I transplanted to Rhode Island about 20 years ago, so I can almost call myself a Rhode Islander by Rhode Island standards. I think I might have another decade or two to go. But I am very, very happy to be representing the communities of Narragansett and North Kingstown in the Rhode Island General Assembly. I am a first-term legislator. And I was very excited for this opportunity to be able to jump into this work that, so many people on this call and across our region have been doing on this really important work. Environmental issues were really kind of top line for me in terms of, why I wanted to run for office and the types of causes that I wanted to champion. And so I'm so happy to be taking this on. So obviously, we've heard a really great setup about TCI and about, what that is looking like in some different states. So I'm happy to speak a little bit to where things stand in Rhode Island. So in terms of just logistics, we had our Senate hearing on this bill, which in Rhode Island is Senate Bill 872. We named our enabling legislation for TCI the Transportation Emissions and Mobile Community Act, or Team Community Act, because we really wanted to focus on this idea that this is an opportunity not just to help meet our climate goals in Rhode Island that we have recently established by codifying into law the Act on Climate, which sets standards for our greenhouse gas emissions. But we also just really wanted to emphasize the idea that this is legislation that is fixing other problems in communities. This is helping with, as people have alluded to, health issues that are very costly and also inequitably experienced in our communities. And this is also really an opportunity to create a revenue stream for things that will meet communities' needs. And so, as was referenced in my introduction, my background is in mental health. And so that is, usually the lens I see things through. And, basically where I see Rhode Island as being in terms of like stages of change is that for a long time, we were kind of stuck in like pre-contemplation. Are environmental issues really an issue? Do we really need to do anything about this? I'm really not sure. We moved on to contemplation, like maybe we really should figure this out, and now we're really in that preparation and like ready to be kind of sprung into action phase. And I see us as kind of being right on the edge of that. So in terms of the status of the legislation, we had a great hearing on it last night. A couple of people on this call right now who you've heard from and will be hearing from gave some great testimony. The Environment and Agriculture Committee in Rhode Island, I'm the vice chair of that committee, is definitely on board with the need to cut our transportation emissions. There's a lot of support for this legislation. And so really I see my role as needing to do a couple of things in terms of my colleagues. One is really just reinforcing that message that was already referenced here today, that the situation we have now is costly. Doing nothing is not without cost, and not just in terms of environmental costs, but also those costs that are embedded in all of those healthcare outcomes that we've been talking about, and different things. And that, on the other side of this change, there will be cost savings. And so that's something that I'm really trying to emphasize. The other piece that I'm really trying to emphasize is the idea that what we're trying to do here is turn down a volume and not flip the off switch. I think that, people kind of immediately are having this reaction of like, I have to give up my car and ride a bus everywhere. Like, how is that going to work? And, so really just helping people understand like that is not the situation at all. We're trying to look at, just an overall reduction in vehicle miles traveled by, fossil fuel burning vehicles in making those different switches, that will overall bring our volume down, but, still account for kind of different types of situations. And then the other piece, and this is the one that I'm really excited about, is making sure that the projects that we're investing in are being informed by the communities that we're doing them in. And so in Rhode Island, one of the things that we did with the Equity Advisory Board is we built in a provision that a member from each health equity zone in Rhode Island is invited to be part of that board. And so in Rhode Island, we have these health equity zones across the state that are already people who are embedded in their communities, who really have the best sense of what communities need in all different aspects. So, definitely in looking at like social determinants of health, is housing an issue in that community? Is there a food desert? Is there, different types of inequities in terms of educational opportunities. And so these are the people who are really best situated to be informing us in terms of where we can make those investments and what type of investments we can make to be able to get those better outcomes that those communities need. And so the other thing that I'm really trying to emphasize is giving some examples of what those things might look like. So for example, that might look like making sure that there is public transportation, that runs to an employer that employs a lot of people in that community. So instead of people having to commute and having the expense of a car, is that a service that we could try to implement and provide that will benefit, the environment, the workers, and the workplace. In transplanting from Massachusetts to Rhode Island, I was shocked at the lack of sidewalks in Rhode Island. We just don't like them here. So, that's a big change, right? And I mean, that impacts so many different things. If you have a town center of commerce that becomes walkable and bikeable, as a town nearby in South Kingstown to me has just recently done, it makes a world of difference in stopping those kind of short little drives that people are doing, and in really encouraging people to maybe walk there, to bike there, to stay there and spend their money, which is an advantage to the community, and that benefits people in all different areas of life. The idea of broadband was also referenced earlier, and that's another one that I want to touch on, because I think that, being able to think about the difference that would make, especially to rural communities, is a really important one to emphasize as well. So those are just kind of some examples, but that's sort of where things stand now. The House will have its hearing soon. I don't believe that has been scheduled yet, but my job now is to continue to talk to my colleagues about all these benefits and answer any questions they might have. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone here has as well. Thank you so much.
Senator, thanks so much. It's very helpful to hear what that bill will do in Rhode Island, and that it's going. We all hope it's going to move forward, and that many of your colleagues are supportive. So I have seen a couple of questions come in. We're going to get to questions before the hour is up, but before we do, I think it's very important for folks who are with us today to understand how they can take action. In particular, in Connecticut and Rhode Island, where we need legislation to make TCI happen. So I'm going to ask Hank Webster and Amy Mclean from the Acadia Center, which is a New England-based environmental nonprofit advocacy and research group, to share what the folks that are on today's webinar can do to actually make sure that TCI becomes a reality in those two states. I'll share my screen because I have slides from them, and we'll let whoever wants to start between the two of them jump in. I think Connecticut is up first, so Amy, that's you.
Okay, great. So thank you everybody for being here today. My name is Amy Mclean. I'm with the Acadia Center in Connecticut. I'm the director and senior policy advocate. And yes, that was our commissioner. So she's doing an amazing job, and we are really excited to be part of the solution here. And there are a number of people. I was spying on the participants, and I noticed that I had a little bit of some Connecticut contingent on this call. And especially with the league being so involved, we do have to do a little work here. I think you heard Katie Dykes say this. And so what you have here in front of you is a little bit of an outline for how you can do something that's going to make a difference. Essentially, this bill is 884, and the margins of the legislators it's pretty thin. We know that there are Democrats that are even struggling with this, even though it's their governor who's asking them to do this, because they are worried about some of the, I would say, misinformation as well that's been spread by others. So we need to shore up our legislators because every vote is going to make that difference. They are hearing from the opposition, but they need to hear from the folks that believe this is the right way to go. So for those of you who have never had to do this before, it's not hard. You just go to the Connecticut General Assembly website. You send them a message saying that the Transportation Climate Initiative is something that you would like to see happen. And you mention that, it is a bipartisan effort, regional bipartisan effort, and that it's a way that we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. These bullet points are very simple. Discuss the importance of it to the communities, including health and jobs, and discuss how TCI could impact in your own life if you think it through. And then ask if they are willing to meet or speak on the phone, or do a Zoom or whatever. And then just, it's just important because they hear from the opposition and they need to hear from us. So for more information on TCI, there's a website, and I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And if you go to that website, you can just click on make an impact, and then there's also process and procedures there so that you can use that to reach out to your legislators. So thank you very, very much for your time today. And please do take action, because I think that's how we're going to win this.
Hank, over to you.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Chris. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm also thrilled to be here and to have heard from Vice Chair Demario, who is the prime sponsor of this bill. Thank you very much for that and for your great explanation of the legislation in Rhode Island. Chris, I'm still seeing the Connecticut slide, which is fine. I can start talking. Yeah, okay, there we go. So much like in Connecticut, in Rhode Island, we need legislation to make all the benefits of TCI and TCIP a reality. And the two legislative vehicles are Senate Bill 872, which you've already heard about, and the companion bill, which is very similar in language, if not identical to that in the House in House Bill 6310. The landscape in Rhode Island, if you haven't, if you don't recall, or if you've forgotten, we did get a new governor at the beginning of the year. We lost Governor Raimondo to the Biden administration, so the nation's gain was our loss in terms of TCI experience and expertise. But we have been briefing Governor McKee, advocates, legislators, people from in the state, outside the state, and we continually hear that he is warming to TCI. And what I think would be most helpful particularly for House legislators, but really across the entire General Assembly, is for Governor McKee to support TCI more publicly, so that we can make sure that we get that House hearing, that we continue to progress the legislation across the line in both chambers and get it to his desk. So our colleagues over at Climate Action Rhode Island and the Climate Crisis Campaign in Rhode Island have established an action network alert. This will basically generate a petition to Governor McKee urging him to boldly express his support for TCI, so that there's that good legislative push as we approach the end of the session. So I put the link into the chat, and it's also here if you want to copy it. And for all of you who've participated in these kinds of petitions, sometimes you get a form letter, or an elected official gets a form letter with a bunch of signatures, and it gets sort of taken as one mass message. And so if you have the ability, if you have the inclination, really adding a little bit of a personal touch to each of the messages really, I think, helps demonstrate that people are engaged on this, that they recognize the benefits that their own communities could see from TCIP investments. And so really, I bolded the last one for a reason, to mention what you'd like to see in your community, because Governor McKee is very community focused. He is very familiar with the mayors. He used to be a mayor. And so he's very focused on helping municipalities rebound from the pandemic, and also to progress into this clean energy future after we've signed the Act on Climate. So that's the action alert. There's also a local Rhode Island website that has really gathered a lot of the resources and can bring you up to speed on where we are today. And that's our pitch. So I appreciate all of your help that you would be sending Rhode Island's way.
Thanks so much, Hank. I'm going to do a very quick slide on Massachusetts, and there was a question about why we're not paying enough attention to Massachusetts. Don't worry, I'm born and raised in Massachusetts. Massachusetts will always get attention. But the reason why there's somewhat less of a focus is because Massachusetts has already passed legislation that allows the governor to enter into TCI. So we do not need legislative action in Massachusetts in the same way that Rhode Island and Connecticut do. However, there's still an opportunity to pass legislation that we think will make TCI even better. And that's House 3264, Senate 2138, sponsored by Representative Natalie Blais in the House and Senate Transportation Chair Joe Boncore in the Senate, an act relative to environmental justice. It has many of the components of the bill that Senator Demario walked us through earlier. And I'll note that Senator Boncore represents East Boston and downtown Boston, Cambridge, one of the most dense Senate districts in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Representative Blais represents the most rural state representative district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts out of 160. So there's a real clear message here that this is a program that can benefit people no matter what kind of community they live in. So we encourage folks to take action in Massachusetts too, in addition to Rhode Island and Connecticut. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we've got about 7 or 8 minutes for some Q&A. I've seen some Q&A come through already, and I'm going to farm out some of these questions to our participants in the webinar. The first is, how does the permitting system work in practical terms? Who are the entities that are actually being regulated here, and how do we ensure that they are paying the proper amount or buying the proper amount of permits to have TCI work across a broad region? Maybe Hank or Mal or Ali, one of you could jump in with just a little bit more detail about who's regulated in TCI and how they purchase the permits.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and take a stab, and then if Hank or Ali have something to add, that would be great. But essentially, the regulated entities here are fuel suppliers and distributors. So it's not your local mom and pop gas station. It's, you know, the larger terminal, wherever the fuel enters the state's economy, really, is what we're talking about. And the way that these permits or allowances are tracked is through a regional auction system. And so the first year of the program, really in 2022, that'll be a baseline year for each state to be able to get a sense of where emissions are coming from, and to establish what the baseline is for emissions reductions for the 10 years that the program will be operating. From there, the program will really be able to take off, and it works very similarly to the regional greenhouse gas initiative, in the sense that all of this is totally invisible to the consumer. This happens, you know, kind of behind the scenes administratively, and consumers will not really notice a large impact while this goes on. But would love to hear from Hank and Ali if you have anything to add.
I think you nailed it, Mal. That is how the program's working. So yeah, at the regional level or at the wholesale level.
Well, let me jump to the next question then. And I'm so grateful that Commissioner Dykes is still with us here. Commissioner, we have a question about some of the trade-offs around the energy that's already embedded in a gas-powered vehicle. It certainly took a lot to make that happen, to manufacture that. And it may not be smart environmentally for us to just scrap all of our internal combustion engines immediately. There's going to be a logical ramp up, I think, but could you maybe share a little bit more about how Connecticut is thinking about a transition to electric vehicles, what the timelines might be for that, and how TCI can be complementary to the state's goals of electrifying transportation?
Well, that's a great question. So first, let me say that, you know, it's so important for us to act with urgency in getting the tools we need to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And I have my preschooler who's now home, but that we need to, you know, when people are purchasing these vehicles, they're going to be, you know, it's going to be when it's the right time for the consumer, and folks are going to be thinking about when, you know, their car is breaking down, when it's time to opt for, you know, making a change in terms of a purchase. We're not, you know, through this program, you know, banning the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, for example, but we already see that the market is starting to move in this direction, where internal combustion engine vehicles are going to reach price parity, where they're going to be on the same, you know, price point as an electric vehicle very, very soon. And so I think a lot of what we're doing with TCI is to enable that, to make sure that the choice of an electric vehicle is something that more people can opt for as soon as possible, by making sure that we can end range anxiety by having chargers available, and especially to make sure that we can address any inequities in terms of, you know, all communities being able to opt for an electric vehicle, whether that's a renter, you know, or someone living in a rural community where there may not be as much access to charging, or making sure that we can provide rebates for used vehicles, which is, you know, how I purchase my vehicles, you know, so I think a lot of what TCI will do is help to fill in some of those gaps in the market to have accessible charging and affordable electric vehicles for everyone, for all communities. At the same time, you know, TCI is not just an EV program. Obviously, electric vehicles are going to be a major part of how we reduce emissions from the transportation sector, but there's full flexibility for states to be able to use the revenues from this program to invest in things that help people not even have to get in a car, but to opt for, you know, bike commuting, walking, transit-oriented development, all of those other solutions as well. So all of that is to say that, you know, we definitely need to look at the life cycle analysis in terms of early retirement of internal combustion engine vehicles. But honestly, I see this EV revolution happening even faster than we anticipated. And we are going to see the turnover of those fleets and people opting into EVs, you know, really quickly. So we're excited about what this can mean.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. And everyone, I think, saw the news yesterday about the Ford F-150. To your point about price parity, it's being priced at the same price point, essentially, as the Ford F-150 internal combustion engine. So it's one of the first examples where there's really a like for like, and the price is the same. And it's showing that EVs are cost competitive in addition to all these other benefits that they bring. So an exciting time to be working in transportation and the environment. So we need to bring this webinar to a close. I want to thank first all of our attendees who joined us today, many of them members of the League of Women Voters chapters in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. Please take action. Please be engaged and involved in TCI. This is a critically important program, not only for Southern New England, but really for the entire region and ultimately for the country and for the world if we can use it to reduce carbon emissions. I also want to thank all of our presenters today, Mal and Hank and Amy and Allie. Senator Demario, thank you so much for taking your time to join us today. Commissioner Dykes, thank you. And then finally, just thank you to the league chapters themselves and the co-presidents. It's been fantastic to work with you all on this. We love the energy that you bring, the attention to this important civic issue. And I think that this event was in the best spirit of the League of Women Voters. We heard earlier today that Allie Gold Roberts grew up in a league family, and she's renewing her membership with the league, and in part because of this event. And so we're so grateful to the league and all that you do to advance this conversation. With that, I'm going to close things out. Thank everyone for attending. This recording will be available for folks that want to watch it later or want to share. Thank you so much.